Imagine you roamed the snow-draped north, where the old gods watch, and every frostbitten step mocks southern lords who think kneeling is a personality trait. Welcome to whispered sleep sagas, where starlit tales unravel into dreams. Dim the light, nestle into your coziest spot, exhale your cares, sink into softness, and let tonight's story, gentler than a hobbit's nap, carry you to sleep's cozy embrace. If this tale lulled you toward dreams, or made you chuckle like a wildling slipping on ice with the grace of a drunken mammoth, give it a like and subscribe. No pressure. My ego's as sturdy as a Westerosi winter, but your support keeps the firelit stories burning. The north stretches endlessly beyond the wall, a frozen hymn to defiance carved from ice and stubbornness. Here, where the old gods still whisper through ancient weirwoods, and the wind carries stories older than the Seven Kingdoms' petty squabbles, the free folk have made their home. They call themselves free for good reason. No lord's banner flies over their camps. No knight's sword demands their knees bend. And no southern fool's notion of honor dictates how they survive another brutal winter. You wake to the frost-kissed dawn, snow whispering secrets against the elk-hide walls of your shelter. The air bites at your lungs with the enthusiasm of a stark pronouncement, sharp and unforgiving, yet somehow familiar as an old friend's insult. Your breath fogs in the dim morning light, creating small clouds that drift lazily upward like the prayers of desperate septons, though you suspect the old gods are far too busy keeping the trees from freezing solid to listen to your morning complaints about the cold. The clan's fire pit crackles in the distance, its smoke threading through the settlement like a grey ribbon binding your people together. The free folk understand fire differently than southerners. It's not just warmth or light, it's survival incarnate. The difference between waking up tomorrow and becoming another cautionary tale whispered around future flames. Every log that burns is a small victory against the North's endless appetite for freezing its inhabitants into ice statues with poor posture and worse attitudes. Grenna Frostborn, your clan's chief, emerges from her tent with the measured grace of someone who survived 40 winters by being tougher than the ice that tried to claim her. Her hair, streaked silver and brown like the bark of ancient weirwoods, hangs in intricate braids adorned with small bones and iron rings, each one a story, a victory, or a reminder of someone who didn't make it through last winter's particularly vindictive mood. She surveys the camp with eyes pale as frozen lakes, taking inventory of her people with the calculating precision of a trader counting coins, except her currency is measured in heartbeats and the stubborn refusal to die. Another day the wall hasn't crushed us, she announces, to no one in particular, her voice carrying the dry humor that keeps wildlings sane when sanity itself seems like a luxury they can't afford. I consider that a personal victory over whatever southern lord thinks he owns this frozen wasteland. You stretch, feeling your joints protest with the enthusiasm of a septon discovering wine isn't just for ceremonies. The elk hide beneath you has molded itself to your body overnight, creating a surprisingly comfortable nest that makes leaving it feel like abandoning a loyal friend. But the clan's rhythm cools, and the free folk have survived this long by understanding that comfort is earned through work, not wished into existence by lazy bones and wishful thinking. The morning air carries the scent of pine smoke, cured meat, and the indefinable smell of snow that's been contemplating becoming ice. but hasn't quite committed to the transformation. It's a clean smell, sharp and honest, unlike the perfumed airs of southern courts that hide decay beneath layers of rosewater and political maneuvering. Here, what you smell is what you get, usually cold, occasionally wet, and always authentic in its determination to freeze your nostrils shut. Your spear leans against the shelter's frame, its bronze point gleaming with the dull shine of metal that's seen honest work rather than ceremonial polish. The free folk craft their weapons with the understanding that pretty things don't keep you alive. Functional things do. This spear has taken down rabbits, helped negotiate with particularly stubborn traders, and served as a walking stick through countless miles of snow that seemed personally offended by your attempts to walk through it with dignity intact. The settlement awakens around you with the gradual efficiency of a clan that's learned to coordinate survival without formal meetings or flowery speeches. Children emerge from shelters like small, bundled explosions of energy, their laughter cutting through the morning cold with the fearlessness of youth that hasn't yet learned to properly respect the North's capacity for creative forms of freezing. They chase each other between the tents, their feet crunching through snow with the musical rhythm of a percussion section that's enthusiastic but slightly offbeat. Torrin Icebeard, the clan's best tracker, stretches beside his shelter with joints that crack like kindling. His beard, magnificent and frosted white despite his relatively young age, makes him look like a wise man until he opens his mouth and reveals the cheerful pragmatism of someone who tracks animals for a living and finds their predictability refreshing compared to human behavior. He catches your eye and grins, his teeth white against the backdrop of facial hair that could house a small family of birds if they weren't too sensible to live in the North voluntarily. "Sleep well," he calls out, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer involves at least 3 position changes, 2 moments of wondering if that sound was wind or something with teeth, and 1 philosophical contemplation of why anyone chooses to live where the air hurts your face just by existing. You nod, rising to your feet with the careful dignity of someone whose body has opinions about sleeping on frozen ground, regardless of how many hides and furs attempt to mediate the relationship between flesh and frost. The morning routine of the free folk begins not with ceremony or prayer, but with the practical acknowledgement that another day requires fuel, warmth, and enough productivity to justify continuing this elaborate dance with survival. The clan's hunters gather around the fire pit, sharing heated stones wrapped in cloth to warm their hands before gripping weapons that will become extensions of their will for the day's hunt. Their conversation flows with the easy rhythm of people who've learned to find humor in hardship, sarcasm in suffering, and camaraderie in the shared understanding that complaining about the cold is less effective than dressing for it and getting on with the business of not freezing to death. Mara Swift-Arrow, whose aim with a bow makes even the cockiest rangers look like children throwing stones at imaginary targets, holds court near the flames with a story about yesterday's near miss, with a particularly intelligent rabbit that seemed to understand tactical retreats better than most southern knights. Her gestures paint pictures in the air, her hands describing the rabbit's escape route with the precision of a battlefield commander explaining strategic withdrawals to troops who'd rather hear about victories but need to understand why sometimes running away is the smartest thing you can do. Cunning little beast, she concludes, shaking her head with genuine respect. Probably descended from the first rabbits who decided kneeling to carrots was beneath their dignity and headed north to live free or become someone's dinner on their own terms. The laughter that follows is warm despite the morning cold, the kind of humor that transforms hardship into shared experience rather than individual suffering. This is how the free folk survive, not just through individual strength or cunning, but through the collective decision to find something worth laughing about, even when the alternative is freezing solid, with expressions of grim determination that wouldn't impress anyone except the ravens looking for interesting places to perch. You join the hunter's circle, feeling the fire's warmth seep through your furs, with the grateful relief of ice finally admitting it, might consider melting if approached with sufficient patience and kindling. The flames dance with hypnotic irregularity, each flickering a small rebellion against the morning's attempts to freeze everything solid, just to prove a point about who really runs this corner of the world. Grenna approaches the group with a measured stride of leadership that's earned rather than inherited, her boots crunching through snow with the authority of someone who's guided her people through enough winters to know that confidence isn't about pretending the cold doesn't exist. It's about respecting it while refusing to let it dictate your life's terms. She carries a bundle of rabbit pelts, their fur still thick and glossy despite having been recently separated from their original owners. Through the application of patient hunting and accurate aim, today's trading expedition to the Then's settlement, she announces, her voice carrying across the camp with the clarity of someone who's learned that important information delivered quietly tends to get lost in the wind, and lost information in the north tends to result in consequences more permanent than embarrassment. Torrin, Mara, and Kyle will accompany me. The rest of you maintain the camp and keep the fires burning. The old gods help anyone who lets our flame die while we're gone. They'll answer to me, and I'm significantly less forgiving than ancient tree spirits with their priorities straight. The mention of the Then people brings a collective shift in the group's mood. Not fear exactly, but the heightened attention of wildlings preparing to deal with other wildlings who have opinions about bronze working, territorial boundaries, and the proper way to conduct negotiations that don't end with everyone involved regretting their life choices. The Then are known for their skill with metal, their rigid adherence to their own cultural traditions, and their capacity to drive hard bargains with the enthusiasm of traders who know their products are worth the premium they charge for them. You check your gear with the methodical precision of someone who's learned that forgotten equipment in the north tends to result in stories that end with phrases like, "and they never found the body," or "which explains why we don't go there anymore." Your hunting knife sits snug in its sheath, the blade sharp enough to split hairs if hares were foolish enough to volunteer for the demonstration. Your pack holds dried meat, hardtack that could probably survive the next ice age, and a small collection of trade goods, carved bone needles, a particularly nice piece of amber, and 3 arrowheads knapped from obsidian that gleams black as a raven's opinion of southern politics. The journey to the Then settlement leads through a landscape that showcases the North's commitment to making travel an exercise in character development rather than leisurely sightseeing. Snow-covered hills roll away in all directions, like a frozen sea that got tired of moving and decided to take a nap that's lasted several thousand years. Ancient pines stand sentinel along the ridgelines, their branches heavy with snow that transforms them into massive white sculptures, celebrating the artistic possibilities of winter when it applies itself with genuine creative intent. The path, such as it is, winds between stands of ghostly birch trees, whose bark provides the only contrast in a world painted almost entirely in shades of white, grey, and the occasional flash of evergreen that serves as a reminder that colour hasn't been completely banned from this corner of the world, just regulated to the point where it appears primarily on special occasions, or when the sun hits the snow at exactly the right angle to create sparkles that hurt your eyes with their aggressive beauty. Torren leads the group with the steady confidence of someone who reads the landscape like a familiar book, noting the subtle signs that indicate safe passage versus the more dramatic signs that indicate places where previous travellers made poor decisions and contributed to the local wildlife's understanding of dietary variety. His eyes scan constantly, reading tracks in the snow, interpreting the behaviour of distant birds, and noting the way the wind carries scents that tell stories about what's been moving through this area recently and whether any of it might object to the presence of wildlings conducting legitimate business in what the creatures probably consider their private territory. Then smoke, 2 valleys over, he reports, pointing toward a thin column of grey that rises straight up before the wind catches it and spreads it across the sky like a message written in a language only other wildlings understand. Their home, and from the smell, their work in bronze. Good timing for trade, less good for breathing if we stay downwind too long. The group adjusts their route accordingly, navigating around the worst of the metalworking fumes, while maintaining the careful balance between showing respect for Then territory and projecting the quiet confidence that says they're here for legitimate business, rather than the kind of casual raiding that gives all wildlings a reputation for unpredictability and poor manners. The free folk understand that survival north of the wall depends not just on individual strength, but on maintaining the complex web of relationships between clans that allows trade, cooperation, and the occasional shared celebration of making it through another winter without dying of exposure or stupidity as you crest the final ridge before the Then settlement. The view opens onto a scene that demonstrates why the Then have earned their reputation as the most organized wildlings this side of the wall, which is admittedly a low bar, but one they clear with impressive efficiency. Their shelters are arranged in orderly rows rather than the organic clustering favored by most free folk. Each structure precisely positioned to maximize wind protection while maintaining clear sight lines to potential approach routes that might be used by visitors with less than friendly intentions. The settlement center features the bronze-working forge that produces the smoke Torren detected, its flames bright enough to be seen from significant distances and hot enough to make the surrounding air shimmer with a heat distortion that creates the illusion of summer, despite the snow that covers everything beyond the forge's immediate vicinity. Then smiths move around the fire with the practiced efficiency of craftsmen who understand that bronze doesn't forge itself, and customers don't wait forever for products they need to survive another season in a landscape that considers customer service a foreign concept. Magnar Steer Ironhand, the Then leader, emerges from the larger shelter with the measured dignity of someone who rules through competence rather than inherited authority, his bronze-adorned leather armor catching the firelight in ways that suggest both practical protection and ceremonial significance. The Then don't separate their practical and spiritual lives the way Southerners do. For them, well-crafted bronze is both tool and art, protection and prayer, the physical manifestation of their ancestors' knowledge passed down through generations who understood that survival requires more than courage and luck. It requires skill applied with religious dedication to excellence. Grenna Frostborn, he calls out, his voice carrying the formal courtesy that Then uses for serious negotiations, respectful but not subservient, acknowledging equality between leaders who've each proven their worth through the successful guidance of their people through circumstances that regularly kill less competent chiefs. Your timing honors us. The forges burn bright, and our craftsmen's hands are steady. Grenna approaches with the measured stride of someone engaging in diplomatic theatre that serves important functions, even when everyone involved understands the underlying practical realities. Wildling negotiations follow patterns established over generations, rituals that demonstrate respect without submission, interest without desperation, and the mutual understanding that good trade relationships require both parties to feel they've gotten fair value from the exchange. Magnar Steer, she responds, using his title with the precise pronunciation that shows she's taken the trouble to learn proper, then customs rather than assuming all wildlings conduct business the same way, which would be roughly equivalent to expecting all Southerners to behave like Dornish, just because they live south of some arbitrary line drawn by people with more authority than geographical sense. We bring rabbit pelts, obsidian points, and carved bone needles. Our crafter's work speaks for itself. When the formal opening is completed, the real negotiation begins with the slow, careful dance of traders who understand that rushed business tends to result in misunderstandings that can sour relationships between clans for generations. The Then examine each item with the thoroughness of people who've learned that quality varies significantly between different wildling crafters, and reputation alone doesn't guarantee that this batch of goods meets the standards they've established for items they'll trade their precious bronze to acquire. You watch the process with the fascination of someone learning the subtle arts of inter-clan diplomacy, noting how Grenna displays each item to best advantage while avoiding any suggestion that she's overselling inferior goods, how Steer examines the workmanship with obvious expertise while maintaining the polite expression that doesn't reveal his evaluation until he's ready to make an offer, and how both leaders manage to project respectful interest while clearly calculating the relative values they place on different items in ways that would make Southern merchants proud if they weren't too busy counting coins to appreciate the artistic elements of proper bargaining. The rabbit pelts draw particular attention from the Then traders, their hands running over the fur with the practiced touch of people who know good pelts from adequate ones, who can feel the difference between animals that lived well and those that struggled, between careful preservation and hasty processing, that leaves flaws only experts notice until they try to work with materials that seemed fine during initial inspection, but reveal their shortcomings when subjected to the stress of actual use. Quality work, admits Jorik Bronzarm, the chief trader, his voice carrying the grudging respect of someone who's seen enough poor pelts to appreciate superior ones when they appear. His fingers trace the uniform thickness of the fur, the clean cuts that separate hide from flesh, the absence of nicks or tears that would reduce the pelt's value for the then's intended purposes. Your hunters understand patience. The compliment carries more weight than similar praise would in southern markets, where flattery flows as freely as wine and means about as much as yesterday's weather reports. Among wildlings, acknowledging skill is a serious matter, recognition that reflects not just on the individual craftsman, but on the clan's training, standards, and commitment to excellence that extends beyond simple survival into the realm of pride in work well done. Torren accepts the praise with a modest nod of someone who knows his skills are worthy of recognition, but doesn't need external validation to confirm what he already understands about his own capabilities. The free folk teach their children that competence speaks louder than boasting, that reputation is built through consistent quality rather than clever marketing, and that the best advertisement for your skills is work that makes other crafters study your techniques to understand how you achieve results they struggle to match. The obsidian arrowheads create their own stir of interest among the Then warriors, who understand sharp edges with the professional appreciation of people whose lives regularly depend on the quality of their cutting implements. The volcanic glass gleams with the black mirror finish that makes obsidian legendary among those who value sharpness over durability, knowing that while bronze might last longer, obsidian cuts cleaner than anything short of Valyrian steel, which exists primarily in legends and the collections of southern lords who use ancient blades to spread butter on their morning bread, because they've never faced anything more dangerous than a disapproving look from their wives. Excellent napping, observes Thessa Keenage, the Then's master fletcher, her expert eye noting the precise pressure flaking that creates edges sharp enough to split hairs if hairs were cooperative enough to hold still for the demonstration. Each arrowhead shows the careful work of someone who understands that hunting and warfare require projectiles that perform exactly as expected, that shoddy craftsmanship in weapons tends to result in consequences more permanent than professional embarrassment. The negotiation continues with the stately progress of a formal dance where both partners know the steps but must execute them with sufficient style to maintain their dignity while achieving their objectives. Prices are quoted, counteroffers made, alternative packages suggested, and additional items brought forward for consideration as both sides work toward the mutually satisfactory conclusion that allows everyone to feel they've conducted honorable business with partners they can trust for future transactions. The final agreement sees the free folk trading their goods for bronze spear points, knife blades, and needle awls that will serve their clan through the coming seasons. Tools crafted with the Then's legendary skill at working metal that transforms raw ore into implements of legendary sharpness and durability. The exchange represents more than simple commerce. It's the continuation of relationships that bind wildling clans together in the informal networks that make survival possible in a land where cooperation often means the difference between thriving and becoming cautionary tales told around other clans' fires. As the formal trading concludes, Steer gestures toward the forge, where his smiths work with the focused intensity of craftsmen who understand that bronze working requires precise timing, careful temperature control, and attention to detail that separates excellent tools from expensive mistakes. The invitation to observe their work carries the significance of professional respect, acknowledgement that the free folk represent worthy trading partners, deserving of insights into the processes that create the goods they've just acquired. You approach the forge with the careful respect of someone who understands that metalworking involves temperatures hot enough to cause serious injury to casual observers who don't maintain appropriate awareness of their surroundings. The heat radiates outward in waves that make the air shimmer and dance, creating patterns of distortion that transform the familiar world into something dreamlike and strange, as if the act of working bronze opens doorways into realms where different physical laws apply to the relationship between fire, metal, and human will. The chief smith, a weathered woman whose arms show the burn scars that serve as testimony to decades of wrestling molten metal into useful shapes, works with the confident rhythm of someone whose hands know their business well enough that conscious thought becomes unnecessary. Her hammer rises and falls with metronomic precision, each strike calculated to move the cooling bronze exactly where it needs to go, shaping the formless into the functional through the application of skill, strength, and timing that represents the accumulated knowledge of generations of smiths who learned their craft through trial, error, and the occasional spectacular failure that taught lessons too expensive to forget. Bronze work requires patience, she explains, her voice carrying over the hammer's rhythm without losing its conversational tone. The words of someone who's taught apprentices to understand that metalworking is as much about philosophy as technique. That good tools emerge from the marriage of practical skill and proper attitude towards the materials being shaped. Rush the process, and the metal remembers. Take your time, and it rewards patience with strength. The lesson carries implications beyond smithing, reflecting the broader Wildling understanding that survival north of the wall requires the same careful balance between urgency and patience, the knowledge of when to act quickly and when to take the time necessary to do things properly. The North doesn't forgive shortcuts or reward haste that leads to inferior results, but it respects thoroughness and competence that produces tools, relationships, and decisions capable of enduring the harsh testing that defines life beyond the wall's protective shadow. The bronze spear point emerging from the forge glows with the dull red heat of metal that's reached the perfect temperature for final shaping. Hot enough to move under the hammer's persuasion, but cool enough to hold the form being imposed upon it. The smith's strikes become more precise as the metal's temperature drops, each blow carefully placed to refine the point's geometry, ensure the tang's proper proportions, and create the subtle ridges that will strengthen the finished product against the stresses of actual use. You watch with the fascination of someone witnessing the transformation of raw materials into finished tools through the application of knowledge that seems almost magical to those who haven't learned the precise sequences of heating, hammering, and cooling that turn lumps of bronze into implements capable of taking life or preserving it, depending on the wielder's intentions and circumstances. The process represents one of humanity's oldest partnerships with the elements, the taming of fire to transform Earth into extensions of human will and capability. The finished spear point emerges from its final cooling with the dull gleam of properly worked bronze, its surface showing the fine texture that indicates excellent craftsmanship and promises reliable performance under the demanding conditions that define wildling life. The smith examines her work with the critical eye of someone whose reputation depends on consistent quality, checking the point's balance, testing the tang's fit, and running expert fingers along the edges to ensure they meet the exacting standards that separate their metalwork from the inferior products created by smiths who understand the basics but lack the refined skills that produce truly exceptional tools. Good bronze remembers good work, she says, offering the spear point for inspection with the pride of someone who knows her craft well enough to guarantee the quality of her products. The metal feels substantial in your hands, heavier than stone or obsidian, but balanced in ways that suggest this weight serves a purpose, that the additional mass will drive deeper into targets while maintaining the precision necessary for accurate throws or thrusts. The afternoon light filters through the settlement as the trading party prepares for the return journey, packs loaded with bronze tools that represent not just successful commerce, but the continuation of relationships that bind wildling clans together in networks of mutual support that make survival possible in a landscape where individual strength alone isn't sufficient to overcome the challenges that regularly arise. The Then settlement bustles with the quiet efficiency of people conducting their daily business, with the understanding that each task completed properly contributes to the clan's collective success in ways that might not be immediately obvious, but accumulate over time into the difference between thriving and merely surviving. The return journey takes a different route, following Torren's guidance along paths that offer new views of familiar territory, while avoiding the areas where recent weather has created conditions unsuitable for travelers carrying valuable cargo who can't afford the delays that would result from getting stuck in snowdrifts, or discovering that what looked like solid ground was actually a thin crust over swampy ground that hasn't frozen solid despite the surface appearances that suggest otherwise. The landscape reveals its subtle moods as afternoon shadows begin their gradual lengthening, transforming the stark white expanses of morning into a canvas painted with blues and purples that shift and deepen as the sun's angle changes. Snow-covered branches catch the light and throw it back in brief flashes that sparkle like scattered stars, creating moments of unexpected beauty in a world that often seems more concerned with survival than aesthetics, but occasionally reveals its capacity for scenes that make even practical wildlings pause to appreciate the artistry hidden within nature's harsh practicality. The path winds through a grove of ancient weirwoods whose bone-pale trunks rise like pillars supporting the sky, their red leaves rustling with whispers that might be wind or might be the voices of old gods commenting on the passage of mortals who hurry through sacred spaces without taking time to listen properly to wisdom that predates human civilization by eons. The carved faces in the bark watch your passage with expressions that seem to shift between benevolent interest and amused tolerance, as if the ancient spirits find wildling concerns both important and slightly ridiculous when measured against the longer rhythms that govern the turning of seasons and the slow dance of ice ages that reshape continents with the patience of entities that measure time in millennia rather than heartbeats. Grenna pauses beneath the largest weirwood, its trunk so massive that 5 people holding hands couldn't encircle its circumference, its canopy spreading wide enough to shelter a small settlement beneath branches that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless human generations. She places her palm against the bark with a reverent gesture of someone acknowledging powers older and more permanent than clan politics or trading agreements, forces that dwarf human ambitions while somehow still caring about the daily struggles of mortals who live and die in moments too brief for trees to properly notice. "The old gods watch," she murmurs, her voice carrying the tone of someone stating fact rather than expressing hope, acknowledging the presence of something beyond human understanding while drawing comfort from the continuity it represents. The free folk understand their place in cycles larger than individual lives or clan histories, finding strength in the knowledge that they participate in patterns that have endured since the dawn of human memory and will continue long after current concerns become forgotten stories told around fires that haven't been lit yet. The moment of reverence passes and the journey continues with the steady rhythm of people who understand that respect for the divine doesn't exempt them from the practical requirements of getting home before full darkness makes travel more dangerous than necessary. The wilderness holds different threats after sunset, not just the obvious dangers of twisted ankles and wrong turns, but the subtler perils of cold that grows more aggressive in darkness, wind that carries sounds from sources better left unidentified, and the psychological challenges of traveling through terrain that looks different under starlight than it does during the reassuring clarity of daylight. The clan's fires appear in the distance like warm stars fallen to earth, their light creating a beacon that draws weary travelers toward the promise of hot food, shared warmth, and the comfortable companionship of people who understand that successful days end with stories told around flames that push back the darkness while creating the intimate circles where individual experiences become collective memory. The settlement's familiar sounds drift across the snow, voices raised in conversation, children's laughter, the crackling of logs feeding fires that represent more than mere combustion. They symbolize the continuation of human community in defiance of a landscape that regularly demonstrates its indifference to mortal comfort and convenience. The trading party's return generates the low-level excitement that accompanies successful ventures in communities where each clan member's contributions affect everyone's welfare. The bronze tools are examined and admired with the appreciation of people who understand quality craftsmanship and recognize how superior equipment improves their chances of thriving rather than merely surviving the challenges that define wildling existence. The new spear points will arm hunters whose success feeds the clan. The knife blades will serve crafters whose work creates trade goods for future exchanges. and the needle awls will help maintain the clothing and shelter that keeps everyone warm through the long nights when survival depends on preparation completed during the brief periods when conditions allow productive work. Evening settles over the camp with a gradual dimming that transforms day into night through subtle stages that offer multiple opportunities for observers to note the changing quality of light, the shifting patterns of shadow, and the emergence of stars that appear one by one until the sky fills with points of light that have guided travelers and inspired storytellers since humans first looked up and wondered about the meaning of distant fires that never seem to need feeding, yet never burn out. The northern sky shows constellations familiar to Wildling navigators who learned their positions from elders who learned them from previous generations in an unbroken chain of knowledge that predates written records and probably predates the wall itself. The central fire pit becomes the evening's gathering place, its flames reaching upward with the eager hunger of well-fed combustion while casting dancing shadows that transform familiar faces into mysterious strangers and back again as the light shifts and flickers. The free folk arrange themselves in the loose circle that naturally forms around sources of warmth and light, each person finding the position that offers optimal heat reception while maintaining comfortable social distance and clear sight lines to speakers whose voices will carry the evening's entertainment, education, and gentle philosophy that helps transform the day's experiences into the shared understanding that binds communities together through common stories and collective wisdom. Mara produces a small harp carved from driftwood, its strings fashioned from sinew, that creates music with the pure, clear tones that come from materials that once lived rather than manufactured components that never knew life. Her fingers find the strings with the confidence of someone who learned music not as formal education but as natural expression, the way birds learn singing or wind learns to whisper through trees. The melody that emerges carries the haunting beauty that characterizes Wildling music, simple in structure but complex in emotional resonance. Tunes that speak to something deeper than entertainment and connect listeners to feelings and memories that transcend individual experience. The song tells of seasons changing, of hunters returning, of fires that burn through long nights, while snow accumulates outside shelters that protect sleeping families from cold that would kill the unprepared. The lyrics, when they come, speak in the ancient tongue that preserves words and phrases older than any southern language, syllables that carry the weight of centuries and the accumulated wisdom of generations who faced the same challenges with the same stubborn determination to survive and thrive despite circumstances that regularly test human endurance and ingenuity. Children drowse against their parents' sides, lulled by music that connects them to traditions stretching back to the first men who made their pacts with the old gods and learned to live in harmony with forces that could destroy them or bless them, depending on the respect shown and wisdom demonstrated. The little ones will carry these melodies forward into their own adult lives, teaching them to children not yet born who will face their own versions of the eternal challenges that define existence north of the wall, adding their own experiences to songs that grow richer and more meaningful with each generation that adds its voice to the continuing story. The fire burns lower as the evening progresses, its flames settling into the steady glow that provides warmth without the dramatic dancing that characterized its earlier enthusiasm. Conversations become softer, more intimate, as people share thoughts that emerge in the comfortable darkness where harsh daylight can't expose vulnerabilities or judge the emotions that surface when defenses relax and hearts open to the possibility of connection that transcends the practical necessities that dominate daily life. Torrin speaks of tracks he's noticed at the territory's edges, signs that suggest other clans are moving in response to changing conditions that might be weather-related or might indicate shifts in the complex relationships between wildling groups who share the vast spaces beyond the wall. His observations carry the calm professionalism of someone reporting facts rather than expressing concerns, though the implications aren't lost on listeners who understand that information about neighboring clans' movements requires careful interpretation and appropriate responses that balance caution with the maintenance of relationships that benefit everyone involved. 3 days travel northeast, mammoth tracks heading south, he reports, his voice carrying across the circle with the clarity of someone accustomed to delivering information that others need to hear accurately. Obul Hrothgar's clan, most likely. They're early for their usual winter migration, which suggests either good hunting that's pulling them forward or poor conditions that are pushing them away from their normal ranges. The assessment generates thoughtful nods from clan members who understand the implications of neighboring groups' movements for their own security, hunting territories, and trading opportunities. Wildling clans exist in careful balance with each other, maintaining territories through tradition and negotiation rather than formal boundaries, respecting each other's needs while protecting their own interests in ways that require constant attention to changing circumstances and diplomatic sensitivity that prevents minor disputes from escalating into conflicts that would weaken everyone involved. Grenna absorbs the information with the measured consideration of someone who must balance immediate clan needs against longer-term strategic concerns, weighing the benefits of reaching out to establish contact with Hrothgar's people against the risks of appearing either aggressive or desperate. The free folk understand that successful leadership requires making decisions based on incomplete information while maintaining the flexibility to adapt when circumstances change or additional intelligence becomes available through sources that might not reveal themselves immediately. We'll monitor their progress, she decides, her tone carrying the authority of someone whose judgment has been tested through previous challenges and proven reliable enough to earn continued trust from clan members whose lives depend on the quality of their leaders' decision-making process. If they settle within reasonable distance, we'll extend proper greetings and explore opportunities for mutual benefit. If they continue south, we'll respect their journey and maintain our current territories without interference or provocation. The decision reflects the complex calculations that guide wildling diplomacy, where every interaction between clans carries implications for future relationships, territorial agreements, and the delicate balance of cooperation and competition that allows multiple groups to share the same vast but resource-limited region. The free folk have learned that survival requires both individual strength and collective wisdom, the ability to stand alone when necessary while maintaining the relationships that provide support during the inevitable crises that arise when humans attempt to thrive in environments that regularly test the limits of adaptability and endurance. The evening's entertainment shifts towards storytelling as the fire settles into its most comfortable burning rhythm. Flames providing steady light while crackling with the irregular musical percussion that accompanies the best narrative sessions. Elder Chell, whose memory holds 3 generations of clan history and whose voice carries the practiced cadence of someone who learned the storyteller's art through decades of practice, begins the tale of Bran the Clever, a legendary wildling hero whose adventures illustrate the values and wisdom that guide free folk through the moral complexities of survival beyond the wall. Long before your grandparents learned to walk on ice without falling like drunken ravens, Chell begins, his voice settling into the rhythmic cadence that transforms ordinary speech into something approaching incantation. Words that carry listeners away from immediate concerns and into the timeless realm where stories live and breathe with their own mysterious life. There lived a wildling whose wits were sharper than obsidian and whose tongue could convince a mammoth to kneel politely while he braided its fur into decorative patterns that would make southern ladies weep with envy. The tale unfolds with the measured pace of a master storyteller who understands that the best narratives develop like slow-burning fires, building heat gradually until listeners find themselves completely absorbed in events that happened generations ago, but somehow feel more immediate and relevant than yesterday's mundane concerns. Bran the Clever emerges as a figure who embodies wildling ideals, not through supernatural strength or magical powers, but through intelligence applied with creativity, humor used as a weapon against despair, and the stubborn refusal to accept that difficult problems don't have solutions if approached with sufficient ingenuity and patience. The hero's first adventure involves outwitting a giant who demands tribute from passing travelers, not through violence or trickery that causes harm, but through a clever bargain that leaves both parties satisfied and establishes a relationship beneficial to future wildlings who need safe passage through the giant's territory. The story demonstrates the free folk understanding that strength comes in many forms, that the strongest victory is one that creates friends rather than enemies, and that intelligence properly applied can achieve results that brute force alone never accomplishes. Bran approached the giant with empty hands and a full smile. Chell continues, his voice painting pictures in the listeners' minds, while his gestures add emphasis to crucial moments in the narrative. And he said, "Friend giant, I see you're lonely up here on this mountainside, with nothing but rocks and wind for company. How about I tell you 3 stories in exchange for safe passage, and if my tales please you, you can share them with other travelers who pass this way, spreading entertainment across the north like seeds of laughter that bloom in the most unexpected places." The bargain succeeds because Bran understands that giants, despite their fearsome reputation, suffer from the same loneliness that affects all intelligent creatures forced to live in isolation. His stories provide not just temporary entertainment, but lasting gifts that the giant can share with others, transforming a solitary guardian into a welcome storyteller whose mountain becomes a destination rather than an obstacle. The tale within the tale demonstrates how generosity creates abundance, how sharing knowledge multiplies its value, and how the best solutions to seemingly intractable problems often involve recognizing humanity in apparent enemies. Children listen with the rapt attention that children reserve for stories that speak to something deeper than surface entertainment, their eyes reflecting firelight while their imaginations transform the familiar camp into the legendary landscapes where heroes face challenges that test character more than strength. The adults follow the narrative with equal engagement, finding in Bran's adventures the reflection of principles they apply in their own daily struggles with survival, diplomacy, and the maintenance of dignity in circumstances that regularly threaten to reduce life to a simple question of endurance versus surrender. The second tale within Kjell's performance describes Bran's encounter with a clan of wildlings who've forgotten how to laugh, their lives consumed by grim determination that has gradually leached joy from their existence until they've become efficient survivors, but poor examples of what makes life worth living. The hero's solution doesn't involve dramatic gestures or magical transformations, but rather the patient application of gentle humor that slowly reminds the joyless clan of what they've lost and how they might reclaim it without abandoning the practical skills that keep them alive. Bran spent 3 days with the sorrowful clan, Kjell relates, his voice carrying undertones of sadness that mirror the clan's condition while maintaining the storyteller's detachment that allows listeners to experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them. And each day he found small reasons to smile, the way morning light made icicles look like crystal jewelry, the dignified waddle of a ptarmigan pretending it wasn't afraid of humans, the absolutely serious expression on a child's face while she explained why snow was obviously white because any other color would be impractical for its intended purposes. The hero's gentle persistence gradually awakens the clan's dormant sense of humor, not through forced joviality or artificial entertainment, but through the simple act of noticing absurdities and small beauties that surround everyone, but require conscious attention to appreciate. His gift to the sorrowful clan is the return of perspective that transforms daily hardships from overwhelming burdens into challenges that can be met with grace, determination, and occasional laughter that makes endurance possible rather than merely inevitable. The story resonates through the listening circle with the quiet power of truths disguised as entertainment, lessons that sink into consciousness without triggering the defensive reactions that direct advice often provokes. Wildling children absorb the understanding that survival requires more than physical toughness, that maintaining humanity amid harsh circumstances is both challenge and responsibility, and that the best warriors are those who fight not just for life, but for the qualities that make life worth preserving. Kjell's voice weaves through the third adventure with the confident rhythm of someone approaching a story's climax, building tension while maintaining the soothing cadence that characterizes the best bedtime narratives. Bran faces his greatest challenge in the form of an ancient curse that has trapped an entire valley in perpetual winter. Not the natural winter that wildlings understand and respect, but a magical cold that kills hope along with living things, creating a wasteland where nothing grows and nothing thrives except despair. The hero's approach to breaking the curse reflects wildling wisdom about the relationship between practical action and spiritual understanding. Bran doesn't seek magical weapons or arcane knowledge. but rather applies the patient observation that reveals the curse's true nature. Not a spell cast by malevolent forces, but the accumulated weight of generations of despair that has gradually convinced the land itself that growth and warmth are impossible. His solution involves not dramatic confrontation, but persistent cultivation of hope through small acts of creation that gradually convince the valley that life remains possible. Bran planted a single seed, Chell whispers, his voice barely audible above the fire's gentle crackling, drawing listeners closer to catch words that seemed to emerge from the flames themselves. Not because he believed it would grow in cursed ground, but because the act of planting is itself a prayer to the future, a statement of faith that tomorrow might be different from today if someone takes responsibility for creating the conditions that allow change to occur. The seed's eventual sprouting doesn't happen through magical intervention, but through the gradual accumulation of hope that Bran's presence brings to the valley, his refusal to accept despair as inevitable, slowly convincing the land that growth remains possible if someone believes strongly enough to provide the care and attention that life requires. The curse breaks not in a dramatic moment of transformation, but through the gentle process of renewal that turns winter into spring, one bud at a time, one day of slightly increased warmth, following another until the valley remembers what it means to sustain life, rather than merely endure existence. The tale concludes with Bran's departure from the restored valley, not as a conquering hero receiving rewards and accolades, but as a simple traveler continuing his journey with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has done good work without expectation of recognition or permanent gratitude. His legacy lives not in monuments or songs of praise, but in the valley's continued flourishing and the example his actions provide for others who face seemingly impossible challenges with nothing but determination, creativity, and the stubborn refusal to accept that problems don't have solutions if approached with sufficient patience and intelligence. And that, Chell concludes, his voice returning to its normal conversational tone as the story's spell gradually releases its hold on the listener's imaginations, is why the free folk remember Bran the Clever, not as a warrior or a king, but as a reminder that the greatest strength lies not in the arm that wields the sword, but in the mind that finds ways to avoid needing swords in the first place, and the heart that refuses to believe that kindness is weakness or that hope is foolishness in a world that regularly tests both qualities with circumstances designed to break spirits along with bodies. The story's end brings the gentle stirring that marks the transition from narrative absorption back to immediate awareness, fire warmth, familiar faces, and the comfortable weight of furs that remind listeners of their own good fortune in belonging to a clan that provides both physical security and the emotional sustenance that comes from sharing stories that connect individual lives to larger meanings and purposes. The fire burns lower as the evening progresses toward its natural conclusion, flames settling into the steady glow that provides warmth without dramatic display, heat that will last through the night for those who tend it properly while others sleep. The storytelling gives way to quieter conversations, personal exchanges between friends and family members who use the intimacy created by shared narrative experience to discuss concerns, hopes, and observations that require the special privacy that darkness and firelight create around human communities. You find yourself drawn into conversation with Dalla Gentlehands, the clan's most skilled healer, whose knowledge of northern plants and their medicinal properties makes her invaluable during the frequent minor injuries and occasional serious illnesses that affect people living in close contact with a landscape that regularly provides opportunities for cuts, bruises, frostbite, and the various ailments that arise when humans attempt to thrive in environments that didn't evolve with human comfort as a primary consideration. The winter herbs grow stronger this season, she observes, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone whose professional expertise allows her to read signs in the natural world that others miss entirely, patterns that reveal information crucial to the clan's health and survival, but visible only to those who've learned to observe with a trained eye that separates expert knowledge from casual observation. The frost sage especially, its leaves hold more concentrated healing essence than I have seen in several years, which suggests the old gods are preparing the land for challenges that will require stronger medicine than usual. Her assessment carries implications that extend beyond simple herbal potency, touching on the complex relationships between weather patterns, plant growth cycles, and the mysterious forces that govern the delicate balance between human needs and natural abundance. The free folk understand that survival requires reading the land's moods and adapting to changes that might not be immediately obvious, but reveal themselves to those who pay attention to subtle indicators that predict future conditions and opportunities. The healer's knowledge represents one of the most crucial skills that separates successful wildling clans from those that gradually weaken and disappear into the North's unforgiving embrace. Her ability to transform common plants into medicines that ease pain, prevent infection, and accelerate healing provides the clan with resources that no amount of bronze weapons or hunting skill can replace, giving injured or ill clan members the support they need to recover rather than becoming burdens that drain collective resources or tragedies that reduce the group's overall strength and morale. Show me the winterberry. Preparation, you request. Genuinely interested in learning skills that could prove valuable during the long months when clan members must rely on stored knowledge and preserved medicines to treat conditions that arise when fresh plants lie dormant beneath snow that won't melt until spring returns, with its promise of renewed growth and seasonal abundance. Dalla's instruction unfolds with the methodical precision of someone teaching knowledge that could literally mean the difference between life and death for future patients who will depend on properly prepared medicines, administered by individuals who understand both the healing properties and potential dangers inherent in plants that can cure or kill, depending on dosage, preparation methods, and the timing of their application. Her hands demonstrate techniques, while her voice provides the explanations that transform mere observation into understanding that can be applied independently when teaching isn't available. Winterberries require careful handling, she explains, her fingers sorting through dried berries, with movements that reflect years of practice in distinguishing between properly preserved specimens and those that have lost potency through incorrect storage or natural degradation that reduces medicinal effectiveness while leaving the berries superficially unchanged to casual observation. Too few and the preparation lacks strength to combat serious fever. Too many, and the patient sleeps so deeply the natural healing processes can't function properly, which defeats the purpose of providing medicine that should support recovery rather than create additional problems that require treatment. The lesson continues with demonstrations of grinding techniques that release active compounds without destroying delicate elements that provide the berries therapeutic effects, mixing ratios that ensure proper strength without dangerous concentration, and storage methods that preserve potency through seasonal changes that would otherwise render carefully prepared medicines useless when patients need them most. Each detail carries importance that might not be immediately obvious, but becomes crucial when lives depend on medicines that perform exactly as expected under conditions that don't allow for experimentation or trial and error approaches to healing. The healer's knowledge extends beyond simple plant identification and preparation into the deeper understanding of how different conditions require different treatments, how individual patients respond uniquely to medicines that work reliably for others, and how successful healing often depends on combining herbal treatments with emotional support, proper nutrition, and the patient's own will to recover from injuries or illnesses that challenge both body and spirit simultaneously. Healing happens in layers, Dalla continues, her voice carrying the philosophical undertones that characterize masters whose expertise transcends technical skill and approaches artistic understanding of complex processes that resist simple explanations or mechanical applications, like ice forming on still water, each element building on others until strength emerges from combinations that wouldn't exist if any single component were missing or improperly prepared. The metaphor resonates with deeper truths about wildling survival that extend beyond medical practice into every aspect of life beyond the wall, where success depends on understanding how individual skills, group cooperation, and environmental awareness combine to create resilience that no single strength or ability can provide alone. The free folk have learned that survival is a collaborative art that requires both personal competence and collective wisdom, individual initiative, guided by community knowledge that has been tested through generations of successful adaptation to challenges that regularly eliminate groups that lack either component. As the evening progresses toward its natural conclusion, clan members begin the gradual dispersal toward their individual shelters, the comfortable stirring that marks the transition from communal gathering to private rest, from shared experience to personal reflection on the day's events and lessons. The central fire is banked with careful attention to maintaining coals that will rekindle easily when morning requires renewed warmth. The flames reduce to glowing embers that provide minimal light but steady heat for those who tend them through the night hours when temperature drops. Test the adequacy of shelters and the quality of preparations made during daylight, when work was possible. You make your way toward your own shelter with the satisfied fatigue that follows productive days spent in meaningful activity, physical work balanced with social interaction, individual accomplishment integrated with collective success. The elk-hide walls promise warmth and privacy, protection from wind that carries the bite of deeper cold, and the whispered promises of weather that might require additional preparations or adjustments to routines that work adequately under current conditions. but might prove insufficient if circumstances change in ways that test current resources and planning. The settlement quiets around you with a gradual settling that characterizes communities where daily rhythms are governed by natural cycles rather than artificial schedules, where bedtime arrives when darkness and fatigue combine to make sleep the logical next activity rather than something imposed by clocks that measure time without reference to the body's actual needs or energy levels. Children's voices fade to whispers and then silence as exhaustion from active days spent in cold air overwhelms their natural resistance to missing any potentially interesting adult conversation or activity. The night sounds of the north begin their subtle symphony as human voices quiet and natural acoustics reassert their dominance over the settlement's artificial soundscape. Wind sighs through pine branches with the musical whisper that has lulled countless generations of wildlings to sleep, its rhythm as constant and reliable as a heartbeat or breathing, a reassuring background that suggests stability in a world where many things change unpredictably, but some elements remain dependably consistent across seasons and years. Distant wolf howls drift across the frozen landscape with haunting beauty that speaks to something primal in human consciousness, reminding listeners of their place in the larger community of creatures that share the North's harsh territories through different survival strategies, but similar adaptations to conditions that require strength, intelligence, and the ability to find beauty in landscapes that would kill the unprepared while inspiring those who learn to read their moods and respect their power. You settle into your sleeping furs with the grateful relief that follows days spent in productive activity, muscles pleasantly tired from honest work, minds satisfied with problems solved and skills practiced, social needs met through interactions that reinforced bonds with clan members while providing opportunities for learning and growth that keep life interesting despite the repetitive elements that necessarily dominate survival-focused existence. The furs wrap around you with accumulated warmth from body heat trapped by materials that once protected animals from the same cold that now threatens human comfort, creating a microclimate of life-sustaining temperature within the larger environment that remains hostile to unprotected flesh, but manageable for those who understand proper preparation and maintain the equipment necessary for survival in conditions that regularly test human adaptability and resourcefulness. Your breathing slows to match the settlement's gradually quieting rhythm, consciousness drifting toward the edges of sleep while remaining alert to sounds that might indicate problems requiring attention. The careful balance between rest and vigilance that characterizes life in environments where complete relaxation could prove dangerous, but excessive tension prevents the recovery that makes continued effort possible. The free folk learn to sleep with one part of their minds always listening, always ready to respond to changes that might threaten clan security or individual safety. The day's memories drift through your consciousness with the gentle randomness that characterizes the transition between waking thought and dream imagery. Scenes from the morning hunt blending with conversations around the trading fire, lessons from the healer mixing with impressions from the journey through weirwood groves, where ancient eyes watched human passage with expressions that seemed to carry both judgment and blessing simultaneously. the bronze spear point acquired through the day's trading rests within reach, its weight and balance already familiar to hands that understand weapons as extensions of will and capability rather than mere tools, implements that bridge the gap between intention and effect through the application of skill developed over years of practice with similar implements that serve their purposes until wear, damage, or superior alternatives made replacement necessary for those who depend on reliable equipment rather than luck or hope alone. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities, fresh chances to demonstrate competence while learning from experiences that add to the accumulated wisdom that transforms young wildlings into elders whose knowledge guides clan decisions and individual choices through the complex navigation required for survival beyond the wall. The patterns will repeat with variations that keep life interesting while maintaining the essential elements that have proven successful through generations of testing under conditions that eliminate ineffective approaches with the ruthless efficiency of natural selection applied to human communities. The fire's glow fades to the dull red of banked coals that will burn through the night if properly tended, providing the foundation for tomorrow's flames while conserving fuel that represents hours of labor invested in gathering, preparing, and storing materials that transform cold darkness into warm light through the ancient alchemy that has made human civilization possible in climates where naked survival would be impossible without the controlled combustion that creates heat, light, and the social spaces where communities form around shared sources of both physical comfort and spiritual warmth. Sleep approaches with the gentle inevitability of tide returning to familiar shores, consciousness drifting toward the realm where dreams process daily experiences through symbolic narratives that sometimes reveal truths hidden from waking awareness, insights that emerge when rational thought relaxes its control over mental processes and allows deeper wisdom to surface through images and stories that speak in languages older than words, but somehow more direct in their communication of essential meanings. The settlement's protective circle holds against the night's challenges through the collective vigilance of those who take turns maintaining watch, feeding fires, and listening for sounds that might indicate approaching weather, visiting wildlife, or human travelers whose intentions require evaluation before appropriate responses can be determined. The free folk understand that security depends not on walls or weapons, but on community cooperation that ensures someone always maintains awareness, while others rest, creating networks of mutual protection that allow individual vulnerability during sleep, while maintaining group security through shared responsibility. Your clan sleeps around you with the peaceful breathing of people whose days have been spent in meaningful activity, whose basic needs have been met through competent work, and whose social connections provide the emotional security that makes physical rest possible, even in environments where danger remains a constant possibility, requiring appropriate precautions, but not paralyzing fear that would prevent the recovery necessary for continued effective functioning. The North's ancient rhythms continue their eternal cycles around the small circle of human warmth and consciousness that your clan represents. Vast forces that dwarf individual concerns while somehow accommodating the brief flickers of mortal life that appear and disappear like sparks from a fire, each one unique and temporary, but part of patterns that connect individual existence to processes larger and more enduring than any single lifetime can encompass or fully comprehend. Stars wheel overhead with the stately precision of celestial mechanics that have guided navigation and inspired wonder since humans first looked up and saw order in apparent chaos, meaning in distant lights that provide both practical information for travelers and spiritual inspiration for those who find in astronomical patterns the suggestion of purposes and designs that extend beyond immediate survival concerns into realms of meaning that make existence significant rather than merely possible. The old gods watch through weirwood eyes that never close, their attention encompassing centuries of human struggle and achievement, with the patient perspective of entities that measure time in seasons of tree growth rather than individual heartbeats, seeing patterns that connect each generation's challenges to those faced by ancestors whose solutions created the traditions and knowledge that current wildlings inherit, along with the responsibility to preserve and improve them for descendants not yet born, but already depending on choices made by those who currently bear the burden and privilege of consciousness. In this moment of quiet transition between day and night, activity and rest, individual awareness and collective unconsciousness, you exist as part of something larger than personal survival, contributing to patterns that extend beyond individual life into the ongoing story of human adaptation to environments that require strength, intelligence, cooperation, and the stubborn refusal to accept that harsh circumstances make beauty, meaning, and even happiness impossible for those who learn to find them in unexpected places and unlikely moments. The wind sighs and sighs and sighs again through branches that remember summers, long past and winters yet to come, carrying whispers of ancient promises and eternal challenges that define existence beyond the wall where the free folk have chosen to make their stand against forces that would reduce life to mere survival, insisting through their daily choices that humanity includes more than just staying alive, that dignity, love, humor, and hope remain possible even when circumstances seem designed to eliminate everything except the most basic struggle for continued existence. Sleep comes at last with the gentle embrace of consciousness releasing its hold on immediate concerns, allowing deeper processes to begin their work of integration, healing, and preparation for tomorrow's continuation of the endless dance between human will and natural forces that has shaped every generation since the first free folk decided that freedom was worth whatever price the North demanded for those bold enough to claim it and strong enough to keep it through all the seasons of testing that follow such declarations of independence from easier but less meaningful alternatives. And in your dreams, the old gods smile with carved faces that somehow suggest both approval and amusement, as if they find in Wildling stubbornness a reflection of their own ancient refusal to surrender to forces that would remake the world according to plans that leave no room for the wild beauty that exists only where life chooses its own terms, rather than accepting those imposed by powers that mistake control for wisdom and order for meaning. The fire burns lower, but it burns still, and in its glow, the free folk continue their eternal vigil against the darkness that would claim more than lives if it could, that would eliminate the very possibility of choosing dignity over despair, community over isolation, and hope over the surrender that whispers constantly in northern winds, but finds no welcome in hearts that have learned to kindle their own warmth against whatever cold the world provides, creating light that pushes back shadows while illuminating paths forward into futures that remain to be written by those brave enough to hold pens steady, even when the wind tries to blow them from freezing fingers that refuse to let go of dreams too precious to abandon to any storm, no matter how fierce or long its duration. The North sleeps, but it does not surrender, and neither do those who have chosen to call it home, who find in its harsh beauty the reflection of something in themselves that would rather face honest challenges than comfortable lies, who discover in survival the foundation for lives that means something more than mere continuation, who build from necessity the communities that prove humanity's capacity to create warmth where none existed, to kindle hope where despair seemed the only reasonable response, and to forge from the raw materials of courage and determination the tools that shape wilderness into home through the patient application of love that transforms survival into living, existence into meaning, and individual struggle into collective triumph over everything that would reduce the free folk to anything less than free. And so you sleep and dream and wake when morning comes to begin another day of writing your story in the snow with footsteps that declare to the watching world that here pass the free folk, unbowed and unbroken, carrying forward into whatever future awaits the ancient promise that some things matter enough to live for, to fight for, and to preserve against all odds for those who will follow in paths that you help to mark with every choice you make, every breath you take, and every heartbeat that insists, despite all evidence to the contrary, that hope remains reasonable in a world that rewards those stubborn enough to keep believing in tomorrow, even when today provides little reason to think tomorrow will be different, except for the possibility that it might be better if someone cares enough to try making it so. The golden halls have dimmed, the shuttle rests, and Castor Berkshire breathes in hush. If this tale brought you peace, or made you chuckle at a lion stitched sideways, consider liking and subscribing. No rush. My confidence isn't sewn from gold, just quiet threads of hope. Until we meet again, may your rest be deep, your dreams rich, and your needle always knows its path.